unique way. Unique way because Anthony Asiwaju'S, Professor Emeritus, is one individual that devoted a considerable number of his academic life looking at a specific area of scholarship, borders with a very scientific lens that enabled him as the doyen of border studies in Africa. And when we can do to bring back some of Professor's thoughts, using the border studies in a more multidisciplinary manner. And on the basis of that, we assembled a cutting across all disciplines. And it is my singular honor and privilege to thank individuals. For want of time, I'm not going to mention the names because you have the books with you there. It captures all the names of the authors. But my sound fine appreciation to the authors is a way to appreciate Professor Anthony Asiwaju'S for what he has done in discourse on both. I present to you a book that has been published for Edited and Governance in Africa, cases in honor of Professor Anthony Asiwaju'S. And what we've done with the book is not to just make very conclusive statements about why border studies is important, why neglect of border studies will have economic security and other implications, but to also raise certain key questions around the future of Africa in the context of both contested, negotiated, and even what we think we can call settled borders. There are borders today that might have been settled. There are borders today that are included. There are borders today that are neglected. Yesterday, and Prof drew attention to many of the issues we also captured in the book. In terms of the value associated with undertaking a scientific inquiry on borders, not just looking at borders from the standpoint of countries separated from one another, communities separated from one another, but what is it about these borders that form the basis for unity or conflict or wars, and how, from an anthropological sense, have these borders shaped intergroup relations, and how are these borders also contributing to ongoing conflict and peace efforts across the world. And I think it's within that context that many of the issues that were captured in the book tries to, as much as possible, provide very key insights into what Prof will use, to use Prof's word, at the anthology of policy history. And we say thank you for taking care of Daddy, because through you we are tapping from his expertise, we are tapping from all the blessings that God has given Daddy. And I want to also thank each and every one of you for making time to participate in this meeting this evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We appreciate you. That's, of course, the shortest review you could have gotten from him, but we appreciate you. Thank you. It's about borders. The question was asked, why don't Mexicans cross the border in groups of threes? And we said, because it says, no threes passing. The next item, very importantly, is to bring to the fore the one whom we are celebrating. But we have also taken time to tell you everything about him. It's about borders. So, and everything we have written in the book, when you take it home, you take time to read, because there's a lot about him. But he is one who was born into the family of Peter Egbedeli and Maria Osu Ajini Agbaosi. Forgive me if I make some mistakes in this, because I have done rehearsals for the past 4 months and I still have not been able to get it. But he was born on Thursday, April 27, 1939, around 9 a.m. His father, Peter Egbedeli, was a farmer and his mother was a trader. He also has 2 brothers and 1 sister. He was brought up with a strong sense of family and community, which we see to date as a strong trait of our celebrant. His love for community and his people earned him several chieftaincy titles. His career spanned over 60 years and is centered on border studies. He has received notable awards and recognitions over the years. A few to mention are member of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, MFR, Fellow of the Historical Society of Nigeria, FHSN, and Fellow of the Nigeria Academy of Letters, FNAL. As a former scholar in border integration, he practices it with his family and sons from Benue, Delta, and Edo states. He was married to Victoria Abike Asiwaju of blessed memory, and their union is blessed with 4 children and 8 grandchildren so far. As we celebrate his 82nd birthday, we remember him in a special way in our prayers that God will make him strong. For distinguished guests, for his message, I present to you our own Asiwaju of Yewaland, the Balogun of Imeko, the Fimojoye of Ketu, the Babunwa of Adojo, the Jagumolu of Erinja, and the Asiwaju Unibago of Imeko. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, Emeritus Professor Anthony Asiwaju. Please put your hands together for him as he approaches to make his remarks for the event.
Can I say a word? I have his authorization. Sorry, I didn't know you were coming to the guest of honor so quickly, but I thought I would just take 2 minutes to say 1 or 2 words. I knew Professor Asiwaju as a student of political science in Ahmadu Bello University in the 1970s. And from that time, I found his work inspirational, in the sense that I found it as a pathway to understanding political community. Those of us who are students of Nigerian politics, the notion of political community in this country is an extremely ambiguous one, because we have so many communities that overlap with each other. And the question of borders is always problematic because we have so many of them. I was listening to Chief earlier, who was talking about the aliens that are invading Yahweh land, and I thought the political community is that larger political community of Oduduwa. And when you go into what we study in Nigerian politics, we often tend to focus too much on some of those communities rather than the national community. But I think for me, the one central issue that Professor Asiwaju has placed on the table for all of us is that all political communities, however you define them, look inwards, because it's all about bonding, it's about the inside. But what he has always said through the decades is that you can't look inwards successfully without looking outwards. And when you look outwards from the inside, you find these multiple lines that both, to use his famous words, divide and unite. And his message for those of us in political science has always been, if we look across, let's focus on what brings us together, on what unites us. And I think at this moment, where Nigeria is being torn at the seams, and there are so many threats to our existence as a nation. 2 weeks ago, the Minister of Information and Culture invited me to address a town hall meeting in Kaduna, and his letter of invitation said, at this moment, we are facing a real threat to the national existence of Nigeria. And I was wondering, Lai Mohammed, the PRO, using this language that I've been using, it means the situation is serious. And I think at this moment, some of those foundational principles that Professor Asiwaju'S has built over the decades. Yes, whatever our political community is, and however we define it, let's look inwards. But in looking inwards, let's strengthen that political community by looking outwards. And in so doing, those key communities that demarcate the inside and the outside are important as allies, as building blocks, as spaces of the most intensive interaction between communities. I actually first met him in the 90s at the Maradi Nigeria-Niger border. That was a very exciting time, Prof, you remember. And he used the 3 days we spent on that border community to really dramatize for us. Those of us who are Hausa, speaking with Hausa from Niger. And he was raising the point that you are aliens, aren't you? But you are the same people. And we should always think, when you use the word alien chief, the aliens are also your brothers. Thank you.
I think, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it's time that we hear from our celebrant. Can we clap for him properly now? Let's keep clapping. Let's keep clapping, keep clapping.
Please sit down. Apart from Professor Jibo, one person that is here that I would also have wished to make some introductory remark is Hussein Abdu. I don't know whether he's still here.
I'm here, sir.
Say something.
Okay, sir. Thank you very much. After Professor Jibo has spoken, and I feel he has actually represented some of us. One is my teacher, and then number 2, he's actually my leader and mentor. And then very senior in the political science field of study. Good evening, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for coming to honor our leader in the border study, our father, our mentor, just like what Chris Kwaja mentioned earlier. I've read extensively some of the works of Professor Asiwaju long before I met him. And the day I found out that he was actually Kemi's father, I was, really, really excited, and I kept telling Kemi that I need to meet Daddy, because I accidentally found myself in border studies. I thought my area of interest should actually be largely in political economy, and this I stumbled into it because I was challenged by my own grandfather, and who happens to also have a root in the borderland of Borgu that is currently divided between Nigeria and Benin Republic. And in some of those early conversations, he kept telling my mom and that I need to do something, and I need to do something. And then he tells me all the stories, and so one of these days I got excited about it. And then he had done, because an early documentation himself, just wrote that, although deeply in the public service in Kano, the point, and I decided to do some early writings, which of course, it was just based on some of those anecdotal informations he had, and probably what he heard from his own parents and all that. But he was much more involved in the early days of the colonial processes. So eventually, I found myself into an extensive study of the partitioning process of Borgu. I spent almost 2 years in the archives, both in Kaduna, in Porto Novo, and also in the Colonial Archive in UK, searching and digging into how that happened. First, I mentioned myself in the pre-colonial history. Then I looked at the colonial partitioning process and looked at the impact of colonial rule on the two areas, and came up with a lot of things that I personally feel are missing in the contemporary Nigeria's political history. For instance, when we talk about Lugard, Nigerians speak as if Lugard, the emergence of Lugard in Nigerian politics has been properly discussed. For instance, in my own findings, Lugard first came to Nigeria as a colonel to address the Borgu question. That's what brought Lugard into the country. Because in the history of colonial occupation in Africa, it was the Borgu question that almost led to a war between the French and the British people. They almost went to a war in Africa. There is no other place where this happened, and Lugard was drafted in. So Lugard coming to Nigeria was to address Borgu question. And eventually, he happens to be a loyal British servant, and then they kept giving him other assignments. The second is that we kept talking about the military. And then in the military history, because I know military history because I also taught the military. I taught political economy in the Nigerian Defense Academy. And one of the things I taught was the political economy of the military history itself. And what we were taught generally was around the origin of Nigerian military being the Royal West African Frontier Force. That's correct. But what we haven't also been taught was that the Royal West African Frontier Force was established to address the Borgu question. At the time the colonial authorities came, at the time the British were getting interested in Borgu, they didn't have a military, but the French had. And therefore the French would respond to that situation. And along the line, they had to establish the Royal West African Frontier Force because they are dependent on on some of the mercenary structures they had couldn't work. So so when I did that, I was looking for the right person to actually comment on this. And the only person that came to mind was Professor Asiwaju. Who is this person out there? Because I wasn't in the border study community. If I were talking about democracy and governance issues, I would easily have gone to Professor Jibo and my teachers at Tahiru Jega and others, which I have always gone. But I was working on border studies. And so Kemi decided to send my manuscript to Professor Asiwaju. And then he didn't only respond to the manuscript, he collected my number from Kemi and called and talked about how impressed he was about the manuscript and that his studies, he has done a lot on Borgu, but he had benefited a lot from what I have produced. And I was really, really mesmerized because apart from my reviewers who have made comment, and most of those reviewers cannot speak authoritatively like he could speak. And from there, I knew, yes, I have made it. Because the authority is saying that you have done so well. I actually wanted a blog from him. But he decided to say, no, I'm not going to give you a blog, but I will write a foreword. So that was unbelievable. And I have experienced this. Sometimes we ask for forward, and then we end up drafting the forward to the person who is going to sign. In this case, he actually wrote the forward himself. And it's an extensive one. It's almost up to a chapter. This is what it's going to So this is the history, and since then, I've been working very closely, and we have a lot of conversations on border. Prof has been trying to draft me into the network of border scholars. Unfortunately, I struggle with time to actually be able to get deeply engaged in those conversations. And I want to thank you, Prof. Thank you so much for being there for us. We were privileged to meet you at those very early firebranding days of you, but we met you at the time that you were putting everything together. And in terms of all those years of scholarship, I'm really proud that sometimes I'm going into conferences around borders and then I hear your names kept coming up. And each book I buy in those days and up to today, including the most recent one on border studies, we still have your name coming up. And thank you, and we wish you many, many more years of interaction with you. Thank you very much.